Go ahead.
sentence there, but Anna is with us now. So I'd like
Oh,
you to finish your thought and then we can move over
okay.
to Anna. And welcome, Anna. How's it
I'm
going? You must be busy today.
ah yeah. What Lisa said about communication is it is so absolutely important, and it is one of the biggest stumbling blocks we have. We're in a confusing situation just as it stands. The language is confusing. The names can easily
This
get
might be the last
confused.
time we had to go out.
I
The
know.
identities can get confused. You know now all the problems that we have when we have the United States of America Incorporated, the United States Incorporated, all these different corporations named after our country or named after our federation makes it very difficult for people to understand who we are, who they are, and what the respective identities and roles are supposed to be. And so just from the get-go, we have trouble talking about things. And it's because of the similar names deceits that have gone on. Um, we, uh, we also have all sorts of confusions between the Confederate States and actual states. And oftentimes that causes problems where people get confused and think that the state of state is the same as the actual state. Okay, that's a biggie where all sorts of discussions go off track. Another source of misunderstanding is that we've all been more or less trained since childhood to think of federal code as our law, when in fact only about 8% of the federal code does apply to Americans under some circumstances. So it's actually a very limited portion of federal code that may apply to us, dependent on number one, our location, and number two, the activities we're engaged in. Okay, so there's a natural tendency in the patriot movement throughout the entire country to focus on the federal code as if the federal code applied to us, and it doesn't. It applies to federal citizens. 92% of the federal code applies to them, and only about 8% of it can, under certain circumstances, apply to us. So how do we tell which is which? And this whole situation is exacerbated because they have meanwhile registered us as one of them, so as to make us subject to their law. And so they come in and they try to apply all of the federal code to us when actually it was never intended that that would be the case, and when we naturally are not subject to it. So we have lots and lots of patriots that spend huge amounts of time studying federal code in an attempt to know the federal code and be able to make reply to these courts, which aren't even supposed to be addressing us. And they are addressing us based on false registration. And so anyway, there are lots of confusions just from the get-go, just circumstantially. Most Americans have spent their whole lives thinking that they are living under the Constitution. Actually, we're living under the Declaration of Independence, and it's our employees who literally live under the constitutions and have to obey the constitutions. Just basic who's who questions create so much confusion in this entire effort. And new people walking through the door are constantly bringing forward these same issues. Okay, we get everybody trained up and on the same page, and our assemblies now know that they're standing under the Declaration and not the constitutions, and that our job is to enforce the constitutions on our employees instead of us worrying about and limiting our activities to just the constitutional forum. Once we got everybody in the assembly trained up, then we get new people walking through the door and they have a totally different take on things. Now, we know what their take is because we were there ourselves, right? We should be able to recognize the thought process and the assumptions that they're making that are wrong, and we should be able to guide them along. Another source of problems that we have with communication in the assemblies is that people come to our assemblies battered and bruised and traumatized and hurt, and they've been under threat, and they've been coerced, and they've been the victims of racketeering, and they've been misaddressed by the court system, and they've had their kids stolen from them by armed thugs, and, you know, they've gone through hell, okay? Let's just be honest about this. And they come to us, and they're in search of a different government, an American government, a freedom-loving and freedom-supporting government. And they get here, and it's a shock to their system because they're still embroiled back here dealing with the riffraff and the criminality and the racketeering and you know, the impositions of this corporation, right? So they come in with this attitude. They're anti-government. They hate all government, and they're looking for something different. And they walk through the door, and what's the very first thing they do? They want to argue. They want to fight. They want people to join their cause. Whatever their cause is, they want you to join it. They want to describe to everybody in detail how they have been put through the ringer by the de facto government, right? And of course, we sympathize because, yeah, to one degree or another, we've all been there. But at the same time, we can't get our attention focused on those sorts of litigationist individual issues. We have to, you know, pass on beyond that and keep our noses to the grindstone to get the work done so that we are all free and clear and out of that pen, out of that entire set of assumptions. So those are two of the very common things that happen, is sort of the people bringing the indoctrination that they have from the past forward into the future, and people misunderstanding names, things, getting confused, and people who are traumatized coming in wanting help with litigation involving the de facto government, which is understandable, and sure, we want to help if we can in those ways we can to teach them ways of responding, but we can't let that embroil us. We cannot let that be the focus, because as I learned many years ago, as terrible and as compelling as many of these cases are, if you tried to put them all out one at a time, if you tried to keep all those brush fires going, you know, you'd spend your entire life putting out brush fires and never stopping the actual source of all of this, right? So years ago, I had to kind of man up and say, well, I don't have the resources, and even if I did, putting out brush fires, one brush fire at a time, isn't getting us the traction, isn't getting us the cohesiveness, the understanding, and the power to put an end to these brush fires for everybody. So the assemblies have a need to help these people, and at the same time keep focused. And that's why we ask the assemblies to, in addition to the pillars, set up some of these other standing committees, to have a litigation committee where people can go. And if they have problems with the assembly itself, to have an ombudsman where they can go. And keep these kinds of, you know, contentious things in a box, to keep them contained so that they don't spill over and take the entire energy and focus of the assembly building process and convert it into trying to solve individual problems, okay? Because we've all got a giant problem, and that is our government's been usurped. And we have to reinsert ourselves and rebuild, okay? So, and because we're in the process of rebuilding, we get further construed and confused with this quote unquote restoration of the republic. And that's just another big confusion, okay? So we have internal things that are that have been problems historically throughout the effort. And then we get externalization confusions. I mean, it's not bad enough that we bring forward our own confusions from our indoctrination. It's not bad enough that we bring forward our hurts and our trauma from what we've experienced from this de facto corporate government. But we also get misunderstood externally. People looking at us from outside the assemblies misunderstand what we're doing. And sometimes that's even deliberate, okay? So there's just rampant occasions where there is a misunderstanding about who we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, what kind of authority we have to do what we're doing. Just, why do we do the declaration process and why is that necessary? A lot of people that I talk to who are new are scared to death to declare and publish and record their status, their political status. So there are all sorts of obstacles in our way that are just based on these kinds of confusions. And being aware of them gives us a leg up in being able to address them and try to help people and redirect them and keep going toward the actual goal of restoring our actual state governments, okay? But we are focused on restoring our actual state governments, and then the state governments can deal with the other problems. The state governments are the ones that have the authority, for example, to enforce the constitutions. It's our state citizens who are the parties on our side of the constitutions, and they have the ability to enforce the constitutions. So, right there, just by assembling and identifying state citizens and doing our declarations, we've already got leverage finally to enforce the constitutions on the federal subcontractors. And oftentimes, when I talk to people, what they want is the Constitution to be enforced. They want their constitutional guarantees to be recognized and respected. They want the government to be limited, okay? So just by getting our assemblies organized at the General Assembly level is a major step forward. It gives us the leverage through our state citizens to enforce the constitutions, both within the context of the national rights and guarantees. And it gives us, the Federation, the ability to leverage, again, to make them obey in the international and global jurisdiction. So just what we've accomplished in all 50 states by identifying our American population, by making our declarations, by recording them, and by publishing them, we have already gained astronomical benefit and incredible power that we would not have if we had not done all this. So, while you're looking at all the confusion that exists, while you're looking at all of the obstacles that exist, be of good cheer. Pat yourselves on the back because you're doing the right thing. You're doing it in the lawful and right way, and it is resulting in real advantages for us now that we would not have otherwise. We can enforce the constitutions in all jurisdictions. For many, many years, that was not true. For many years, that wasn't even possible. And now it is, because you, as Americans, have heard the call and heard the word and understood what's happened here, and you have made the difference by creating your assembly and getting the General Assembly assembled. This is just an absolute core part of what needed to happen and has happened because of you and your hard work. So be aware of how important what you've done really is. And be aware that it's benefiting all Americans and that all of those Americans are precious. Everybody that you see, everybody that you meet, everybody that's an American is precious. They are your brothers and sisters. They are the people that matter to the welfare and security and well-being of your community and your family and your country, okay? So that's why it's so heartbreaking when we have examples, and we do, where people have let personal antipathies and suspicions and misunderstandings get completely out of control and have led to, gossip and slander campaigns that I can't even hardly imagine if I hadn't directly experienced, and observed them. For some reason or other, every once in a while, people just hit it off wrong. And when that happens, it's horribly destructive. It's very seldom, it seems, that it can be left with just, George and Don don't like each other, okay? It almost always erupts into a gossip and slander campaign of some kind. And those little personal antipathies result in more damage to our effort than even all the confusion resulting from similar names and and not understanding jurisdiction. It's just incredible, the damage that is caused from gossip, just plain old common everyday irresponsible conjectures, suppositions, suspicions, um, you know, ideas that are voiced that probably shouldn't be voiced, okay? Or that if they are voiced, should be done so very responsibly in terms of having acquired real, actual, credible evidence. Oftentimes it's things like, oh, someone finds out that Joe has a real estate license, so he has a license to sell real estate, and this causes a big furor. Oh, how could he have a real estate license and be one of us, right? He has to be an infiltrator. No, no. What we have to look at is Joe trying to get into a position of power where a real estate license would create a conflict of interest? Okay, that's what we're really concerned about. Is this a conflict of interest situation? Is Joe making his living as a real estate agent? Well, if so, then Joe should not be claiming to be a state citizen, okay? Because a state citizen has a unique loyalty and purpose to represent the interest of the state, okay? And you can't get your entire economy from the federal government side and still say that you're a state citizen, okay? This is the crux of the matter with those things. We all have driver's licenses, right? Even though we're not drivers, even though we're not involved in commerce, even though we are not representing or acting as a commercial entity. The surrounding de facto government has acted like a good racketeer and coerced and forced us as a practical matter to get a driver's license, okay? That doesn't mean that we are not dependable people. It doesn't mean that we're not Americans. It means that we've been the victims of racketeering and deliberate misrepresentation and misidentification, okay? Now, those are issues that we need to address individually and as a group to the best of our ability. We need to be learning, and we need to be protesting, and we need to be doing everything that we can to put an end to this racketeering and coercion that results in all of us having a driver's license. We are supposed to have an ID, and we do have IDs, okay? We've got perfectly good IDs, even IDs that are, they're at the highest standards of the current requirements internationally. So really, they have no reason to be continuing this revenuing activity, forcing all of us to pay them for licenses to merely be able to travel around our own country on our own roads, right? And this is just one example. There are lots of things like that. Every day I talk to doctors who are being harassed and harmed by these licenses that they hold, and they hold these licenses thinking that they have to have these licenses when they don't. They don't even really realize what the license is for. Okay, we have a very, very famous doctor, Dr. Robert Young, who is being prosecuted and persecuted by the de facto government. And they are, trying to accuse him of crimes and all sorts of nastiness. And they've done this for years. And, 9/10 of it began when he was accused as a medical doctor. Well, really, what's necessary, I think, and what I've advised, and I advise all doctors, make a little video of yourself tearing apart your medical license, because you don't need a medical license to practice medicine in this country. Medicine is an occupation of common right. All that medical license does is give you a permission to treat federal citizens. And all you have to do is start calling yourself a physician instead of a doctor, put up a disclaimer in your office saying federal citizens receive services at their own risk, and that's it. That's the end of their ability to coerce you, to prosecute you, to persecute you, to limit you, And they try to limit these guys by saying, oh, well, then you can't write prescriptions. Well, that needs to be taken to court because, in fact, the only things that the federal government has any regulatory power over are what? Interstate manufacture and transportation or sale of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That's how the people that sell cannabis finally got the right to sell cannabis in all these states, and they will eventually get the right to sell cannabis in all 50 states because the federal government and its state-of-state franchises simply don't have the right to regulate any kind of vegetable except tobacco. Okay? That's the only controlled, regulated substance in the entire federal playbook. And they need to be reminded of that. The same goes with, herbal matter of any kind of vegetable, any kind of fruit, anything that you want to grow, you can grow as an American. Now, they might be able to, as a condition of employment, impose upon their British territorial citizenry or upon the actual municipal citizenry, but they cannot impose upon us beyond alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And the other thing that they have that they always use is the Interstate Commerce Clause. And they try to pretend that we're involved in commerce using the municipal estate trust that's named after us as their excuse. But if you've been following along, we torpedoed that whole thing and put them in bankruptcy by claiming their debt and by claiming an ownership interest in all of those municipal trusts, all of the individually named municipal trusts, and that includes the states that were named as municipal trusts. So if you look in our paperwork, you will see that we established claims on all of the estate trusts and all of the state trusts. So both the individual and the state trusts, both the public and the private. We developed those commercial claims on them over a course of decades. And we claimed all their debts and we put them into bankruptcy. All right, so as a practical matter, there was a case decided in April in Texas in which a man properly claimed his baby. And he had a pre-established, his name was Tyndall, and he had a pre-established medical plan that he gave the doctor before his wife entered the hospital, claiming not exactly the DNA of the baby, which is how we do it, so that anything having the baby's DNA is retained by the parents. But he had a similar situation and claim where he did not release the placenta and the umbilical cord or any other fetal matter. Okay, so he kept the total package, okay, with his pre-established medical plan, all right? And then they came back and they tried to do their usual stuff on him and establish basically a bond, a personal bond on the baby as if the placenta and umbilical cord had been donated to the state of state. And he came back and he challenged that and knowledgeably defended his position. And as a result, this case was decided in April, and that establishes the case precedent for all similar cases. It created a binding, permanent block to them just creating these estate trusts and these U.S. citizens that are corporations. It's over, folks. If anybody continues that activity, it's established that there are both civil and criminal procedures. So we took over the commercial end of it and put an end to it at the commercial level. And now he has brought a successful challenge with an actual living baby into the case precedent. And that completely, absolutely, those two things put an end to the entire practice, which has gone on since the days of St. Thomas Aquinas, where the church began this back in the days when they were ignorant of what the placenta was, okay, and has carried on and created this this descendant older brother or sister using the umbilical cord and the placenta as a dead twin. Now, those of you who have heard me talk about this before know what I'm saying, where Kurt Kallenbach had an absolutely extensive, probably 20 years that he researched this particular practice of the church. And he went all the way. I mean, he went back into the earliest records and the earliest examples of the twin, the constant appearance of the dead twin, and how the dead twin took over the name and the living twin was left to pay the debts of the dead twin. And all of this, he nailed it, absolutely nailed it. So anybody who wants to study this issue more and see how it developed out of the ignorance of the early Middle Ages, and how the church used it first, and how it then became a racketeering tool, basically, for industry and government. Kurt Kallenbach, K-U-R-T, Kurt Kallenbach, K-A-L-L-E-N-B-A-C-H, Kallenbach, is the primary researcher into this entire area. And he absolutely nailed it dead to the wall. And this recent Texas court case with Mr. Tyndall, or I should say, his name is something like Golovin Tyndall, that puts it in precedent that establishes stare decisis. This now means that it's come to an actual case with an actual baby and been resolved in our favor for everybody, everywhere, worldwide. They can no longer do this. They can no longer be claiming an ownership interest through the placenta and umbilical cord. And so that whole thing is now at an end. And if they continue it, if they even write our names in all caps for any purpose, they are they're committing crimes and they can be held accountable for that crime because it's now on the books. And so thank you to Mr. Tyndall for doing all of this. He did it to protect his baby and his family. And he had the opportunity and the desire and the wherewithal, and he was solid on his facts. And you know, what prevented, say, me from doing this is that I didn't have a baby to bring to a court in that exact moment in time to bring it to the head. But, you know, sooner or later someone was going to, and in the meantime, we were going to hold all of the estate, the money, the land, and everything that was owed that had been claimed by the municipal estate. We were going to hold it harmless so it couldn't be stolen or misapplied. So everybody working together, doing what they could do, each in their own situation, has now ended, completely ended, the municipal estate trust and their machine used to indebt and to misrepresent and to claim an ownership interest in the living man or woman. They can't do it anymore. And so it's with great pleasure that I announce that those things have been resolved in our favor. And there will no longer be institutionalized debt enslavement at birth, basically. I should explain a little bit of a side issue, almost an anecdote of what we've been doing this afternoon and why I was late. Part of the situation, how this developed, is not talked about in Kurt Kallenbach's research. And so I'm just going to bring it forward here for you all so that you're aware of it. It began with ignorance because back in the dark ages when a baby was born, the midwives observed that the placenta and the umbilical cord were attached to the baby, right? And that when the umbilical cord fell off, the placenta, which appeared to have a heartbeat until that moment, then died. And this happened over and over and over, always. And so there was always this thing there that was this horrible, misshapen, unrecognizable thing, right? That had the heartbeat, right? Just like the baby had a heartbeat. That was sort of like the evil twin, or the inexplicable, the dying twin, or whatever. So what they would do is they would cart away the umbilical cord and the placenta and give it a Christian burial and name it with whatever given name the parents gave the actual child. And so it always created two, right? One that was dead and one that was living. All right, so that's how it started. Out of ignorance of what the placenta was and how the umbilical cord functioned and all of that. Then over time, with this practice, it developed into a racketeering scheme. And what prompted it was the debts of the dead. Now, most of us will, if a family member or even a good friend dies, and they die with normal petty debts like their last telephone bill or something of that sort, we pay it off out of their estate proceeds, whatever money they have in the bank. And if they don't have anything, we pay it off out of our own largesse, just out of respect and love for them. We take care of their final debts. We take care of their funeral expenses. And that's just, normal human doing, right? But then there are always cases where people die without a known family. There are always, examples where, for whatever reason, the person was an outcast, or they were the last of their line, or, different things arise where their debts are not paid. Okay, so then the question is, are the vendors, both commercial and non-commercial, are just left with the bill? They're left stuck with the bill. And so the question was how the bill could be paid, right? Once the person died, how were their bills to be paid and brought to a conclusion? Well, so then they started this practice of considering the placenta and the umbilical cord as an individual person who had died, who was the twin of the living baby, right? So you have this estate, which was created, for a dead baby, right? Which they were calling a baby. And therefore the living baby became responsible for the debts of the dead baby. This was the whole rationale and motivation into creating this system, was getting the living to pay for the debts of the dead. All right. And there is a certain rationale to it. There's a certain need for it because somebody needs to pick up the cost, right? But this was a very dishonest way of doing it, especially once they realized what the true function of the placenta and the umbilical cord were. That should have all gone out the window, and we should have, as individual countries and as people, we should have dealt with the end of life debts of those who didn't have family and friends to pay those last expenses. All right, so I'm just kind of giving you a background into how this developed and why it was converted into this kind of a racketeering scheme to force the living to pay the debts of the dead. And now that whole system is collapsed. It's recognized now in the modern world for a racketeering scheme and an impersonation scheme. And it's also recognized as being untrue because we now know what a placenta and an umbilical cord really are, and why the heartbeat exists in those organs. And, all of that is now scientifically known and evidenced. And we fully realize that is not a misshapen twin that died at birth. It's just, a special purposed organ that was meant to die and to be set aside, and became unnecessary once the baby was born. So as a result of this court case in Texas, we now have a court precedent establishing both commercial racketeering and fraud. And anyone who has been damaged by this is indeed enabled to claim 3 times the damages. And, you know, also coming off of this court case, the damages can be up to, say, $3 billion in an average case, just because of how this has affected individual people and individual families over a long period of time. And many of the commentators that are commenting on this case think that it only went back to around 2014, which apparently is about the time period that Mr. Tyndall became truly aware of the situation through the popular discussion that Kurt Kallenbach was primarily responsible for starting about 20, maybe more than 20 years ago, when he started discovering this church history. But anyway, I'm here to tell you that no, this has been going on since the 1100s. And so this is a very long duration institutionalized impersonation and fraud scheme aimed at obtaining revenue from the living to pay the debts of the dead. And then, so the sum total of it is that all of this is being rolled up almost like a carpet. We did the commercial claims 10 years ago that resulted in the bankruptcy of the municipal entity. All of the estate and the gold bond that was placed on each baby in this system, that was returned to what appeared to be the receiver, which was the British Territorial Estate Trust, right? So when you hear about the 650 plane loads of gold that the military collected from the Vatican, those are the personal one-by-one gold bonds that were placed on the individual at birth, okay? So all of that gold went to the British territorial government, acting as the receivers in bankruptcy from our UCC claims that were processed 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. Now, you have to understand that the Brits and the Romans, the municipal government, have been in cahoots since the days of King Henry VIII, which was, 1580s. Okay, so a long time ago, they formed a sort of a joint partnership. And so it's a 60-40 split between the Roman pontiff and the British monarch, or at least that's the way they had it since the days of King Henry VIII. So when they've gone through these bankruptcy cycles before, what's happened is that, yes, they've been forced into bankruptcy of one kind or another, but it didn't really matter because the entity putting itself forward as the primary creditor and receiver was always their friend, okay? That was always bound by this 60-40 split. So what they were expecting when all this happened is that they would go bankrupt, right? And the British territorial government would be the receiver. And so all of the money, all of the assets that were lost by the Pope in this case, it could have gone either way, but all of those assets would then go to the British territorial government, and the British territorial government would receive all of the gold and all of the land and everything else that was in these municipal assets, trusts, and then they would split it with the Pope anyway. They'd return a 60% share to the Pope and keep 40% and keep on go on skating using our assets. So we've definitively killed the municipal estate trust. They can't create any new ones. They can't, they have civil and criminal bars against it. This case in Texas can be used as stare decisis. You can just bring it into any courtroom. If you have any attacks or any claims addressed to an all capital letters name entity, you can use this case to quash it. And you can use this case as the basis of a complaint against whichever agency or entity is using an all capital letters name to misaddress you. And that part of it is well and done, right? Unfortunately, the British territorial government successfully interceded and presented itself as representing the priority creditors, us. So now we're in the clenches to rebuff their claims, because if we let it stand and didn't dissolve the British Territorial Seamen's Trust that was also created under false and fraudulent circumstances, if we were to let that stand, then they would just do the same old thing all over again. They would keep the 650 plane loads of gold. They would keep all the land titles and property claims. They would keep all of the assets that the municipal estate trusts were scissor kicked into letting go of, and they would apply them to the British Territorial Seamen's Trusts, and then they would give 60% back to their Roman partners. That's why it's so important that we keep going. And okay, we killed the municipal estate trust. Now we have to kill the British Seamen's Trusts and the American Decedent Estates. Okay, so there's a little bit of confusion. Okay, I described to you the Roman municipal practice of creating the dead twin at birth. Okay, that came from the Roman Catholic Church. That then came through the Roman civil government that existed after the Holy Roman Empire was established. That then came through all these generations, all these hundreds of years. That claim against the placenta and the umbilical cord was the basis of the Roman claim, okay? There's also a basis for a British territorial claim that's separate but similar, okay? And we have to deal with that trust and that whole scheme too. I mean, it's not a one-off. We have the British Territorial Seamen's Trust yet to deal with, and that was kind of a reprise of the Roman trust scam with the umbilical cord and the placenta being claimed as a decedent twin. Okay, the British did it a bit differently, but they did it. Okay, and in our case, unfortunately, they did it first. There was a specific timeline and process involved. And what it was that the British basically claimed that we weren't us, that we were British territorial citizens at birth, as if we had been born in Puerto Rico, or as if we'd been born in Guam, or one of the other territories and or possessions of the United States. And they claimed this form of United States citizenship on us at birth. And they did that with the actual paperwork that was signed at the hospital that your pediatrician or other medical doctor signed off on as a witness, that your mother declared you were a United States citizen and agreed to that, okay? Now, there are reasons why you couldn't be a United States citizen at birth if you're born on American soil to American parents. But nonetheless, mistaken as this may be, they had what was considered a very credible witness in the person of your mother, right? And then they had a double clincher in the witness of a medical doctor, which in their system counts for two witnesses. They are superior to lawyers and judges. Medical doctors rank higher in the de facto hierarchy than judges or attorneys. So what the medical doctor says goes, and the attorneys and judges have to support the medical doctor no matter what. So you basically have three witnesses standing against you. Your mother, who testifies to your United States citizenship without knowing what that means and without being given disclosure, right? And then you have the medical doctor following up after her and signing off on it. So they create a bogus citizenship claim right from the get-go. and it's in British territorial hands, and it's British territorial organizations that set this up. They're the ones who start it all. And what they do is they also create a dead twin. They just use a different process to do it. And the process they use is they register you instead of recording you, which is, what your birth should result in a record, not a registration. As I've explained, when you register something, you give up an ownership interest in it. And so it should be a record of birth, not a registration of birth. But they create a registration of birth saying that you are a capital U dot, capital S dot, capital C citizen, as if you were born in Puerto Rico, Guam, or one of the territories and possessions of the United States, and not really an American born on one of the states of the Union as an American. They mischaracterize and misrepresent you as a territorial born in one of the states, when in fact you are just a natural born American native to that state, okay? So anyway, they mischaracterize and misrepresent you, and they register you as a foreign, get this, British territorial U.S. capital C citizen of the United States. And so this creates two estates. One is the estate of the American baby, which they say has been waived, okay? They say that by claiming that you are a United States citizen, your mother has waived your American birthright for you, at least until you get to be 18 or 21, when you can, in theory, reapply and claim your reversionary trust interest, right, as an adult. That is, if you know that any of this went on, which of course you don't. But anyway, they excuse that with that whole argument. And then this American estate is waived, and it goes into a trust, which the court has to hold, right? But which you can't control, which is all controlled by British agents, by bar attorneys. And then it also creates a British territorial person who just happens to have the same exact name as you do, and who also happens to be in the British Merchant Maritime Service. In fact, a warrant officer known as a taxpayer has been created and named after you, and their duty is to collect taxes, tariffs, fees, and emoluments owed to the British king, to the British monarch. So once again, you have two. You have the American Decedent estate that's being operated under your name, and you have the British person, the British warrant officer over here functioning as a tax collector for the king, no less, and operating under your same exact given name. Okay, so you have two persons, an American estate trust that they've glommed onto, and a British territorial officer, a warrant officer in the British Merchant Marines named after you. Okay, and then guess what? After about 7 years, the British territorial warrant officer, the taxpayer, is declared legally dead. Whereabouts unknown. Missing, presumed dead. Okay, so once again, you have the setup. You have the live, or more or less live, infant descendant estate standing here as the surety and the collateral and the bill payee, right, for the dead twin, the British territorial merchant mariner who has gone AWOL and is now legally dead. So they are continuing to charge your American infant descendant estate for the bills of the dead British territorial officer. So you see, it's just a reprise of the old Roman church setup, but it's a British variation on it, and it's happening in the jurisdiction of the sea instead of the jurisdiction of the air. And it's that business right there, the British territorial version of the same racketeering scam that we have yet to unravel and deal with and get rid of, okay? So we still have to We have to skewer the Brits on this, the same way we skewered the Romans on this. And yes, again, our claims are in place and have been in place for over 10 years. They are cured and claimed in commerce against the territorial entities, just like we claimed against the Roman entities. But because it's the same name, they're trying to claim that, oh no, that has to be this other estate. It isn't us. It's the Brits for both of them. The Brits are responsible for the existence of the British Territorial Estate Trust that they created based on the false claim about the British seamen going missing, that Admiralty Trust. They knew that was all bogus. They knew they'd trumped all that up. They knew that they had misregistered millions of people to create these things in the first place. And they knew it that they did it to control assets and to gain the assets of the American people. They knew that. And so it's just a reprise of the dead baby scheme that the Roman Catholic Church had going, that the British adapted from that earlier whole progress and practice for their purposes in the jurisdiction of the sea. Now, the problem is that Admiralty is what? Military. And so maritime falls under Admiralty courts and under different law than the Roman estate trusts that were also created in our names. We have to bring forward the fact that they're using just a reprise of a practice that has already been, completely discredited and found to be both liable for civil and criminal damages. But this is going to be harder to do because guess what? There are two estates that have to be unraveled and returned to the people. And it doesn't just cost credit or debt release. It also requires return of assets. It requires the return of our land. It requires the return of those 650 plane loads of gold. It requires the return of all the silver they purloined, all the cash they purloined, all the share interests in all of the corporations that they purloined. I mean, these guys, the Brits, did the initial dirty work. They did the setup so that the Roman system could be applied to us. The Roman system could not be applied to us as Americans. The Roman system could only be applied to us if we were first considered to be British territorial persons. Okay? So there's a method to this madness, and it involves the creation of two entities, one of which is dead, and the other one, which is, in our case, simply held in abeyance as a waived property interest and inheritance. Okay, well, so imagine that you are the heir of a wonderful kingdom. And imagine that your mother, who is this innocent and sweet person who doesn't know anything about law or property per se, gives birth to you, and she's approached by someone who represents themselves as a hospital employee doing routine hospital paperwork, documenting the birth of her child. And so they hand her this innocuous piece of paper, or so it appears, and it asks you if you are a citizen of the United States. Well, you don't know which United States is being referenced, and it isn't made clear on the paperwork. And if you're an average person, you don't know that citizen means that you're obligated to serve the government, because you were never taught that, and it isn't disclosed in the paperwork or in the discussion related to the paperwork. So your mother innocently signs this piece of paper saying that you're a citizen of the United States, when actually you are a national of a United States, a country, right? And they take this and they register you. They register your name, I should say, as a citizen of the United States, as defined within their context, which means that you are either a corporation or you are a British territorial citizen of one of the territories or possessions. So anyway, you get registered, misregistered, misidentified as a Brit, and that Brit happens to be a taxpayer who subsequently goes missing in the line of duty. While your American estate is assumed to be waived by your mother. Your mother says, without knowing that she's saying this, of course, oh, well, my baby doesn't choose to claim their inheritance as an American. We're in tough straits. I'm a unwed mother, even though she's been married to your father for 15 years, right? So I'm claiming the protection of the British monarch as a ward of the state. In this case, a ward of the state of state. So suddenly you've got this whole setup again, and it's brought to us by the ever guileful and pernicious and always at the bottom of the dog pile British government. And so the British setup comes first, and it allows the Roman setup to come afterward because the Romans couldn't touch us as Americans. They could only touch us as British territorials. And so we had to be first registered and misrepresented as British territorial citizenry. And after that, when the British territorial citizen is declared legally dead, missing, lost at sea, then the Romans could come in and do their bit of dog roll. So folks, we've completely quashed, and it has resulted in a permanent decision against the Roman municipal government and the Roman municipal trusts and the whole practice of creating the dead baby scam. It's gone. Job one. And now we're facing job two. And job two is taking apart the British Seamen's Trust estate, and also not forgetting to take apart the American infant decedent estate that was supposedly waived by your mothers. Both of those have to go too. It's not enough to destroy the municipal estate trust and call it good with this other structure, this other equally pernicious, equally fraudulent, equally criminal structure still in operation in the background. If we did that, what would happen is that President Trump and the corporation that he's leading would get a 40% split of the take from the municipal estate trust, and the Roman apparatus would get back 60% as their profit on all this. So we cannot just stand by and trust the British territorial government to do the right thing. Obviously, the British territorial government was engaged in doing the wrong thing all along, or we wouldn't have this situation. The Romans wouldn't have even been involved. There wouldn't have been any dead babies or dead merchant mariners, and there certainly wouldn't have been any infant decedent estates, meaning that it was a waived estate of American babies. None of this would exist if the Brits hadn't been complicit. And specifically, I mean the British territorial government, which is the military side of the Commonwealth. So we're a third of the way there, folks. We have completely, through the grace of education and action and divine providence, completely killed in all venues, both the venue of the air jurisdiction with our commercial claims against them, and with the win in Texas with the Tyndall case. Both of those things have completely taken that right out of commission. But we still have to deal with the British. And so that's where we're at, is dealing with the Brits. And I can tell you from experience that they are tough to deal with, because they're pernicious liars. They're well practiced. They tend to be lawless, especially in military venues, and they have the guns. Even though they are purloined from us, they have the gun. There are guns that are pointed at us by British masters that aren't even declared as British masters.
I thought you were having an earthquake, because that's what
Well,
happens in
it
California.
sounds like that sometimes. Okay, come on, up, come on. Introduce yourself. This is Baby.
Oh,
is
wow.
Baby. This is a puppy, also known as Sledgehead, who is extremely loyal and likes to guard grandma. Okay, so she was on the other side of the door and making a fuss, so they just let her in so she could take up her post under my desk.
That's
Um,
awesome. She's kind of like Clifford the Big Red Dog, but she's brown. She's
Yes, yes, exactly. And she's very energetic and very friendly. I mean, she's not a bad dog at all, but she's a young dog, and she's still being trained and so anyway, it was either that or we would have had howling going on throughout the entirety of the rest of the show. Um, but yeah, we're in the clinches with the Brits now, and unfortunately, that puts us somewhat at odds with President Trump. Now, the amount of money we're talking about is absolutely astronomical, especially for the Americans, because we had contracts in place that should have prevented this and would have prevented this if they hadn't, pulled their skullduggery and usurpation during the quote unquote American Civil War. Now we have them dead to rights on that issue, and we can easily prove that we're not actually and never have knowingly been British merchant mariners, okay? But the whole issue still has to be brought forward, and they still have to be held to account for it. And so we cannot just go along with President Trump's plan, which was to give us a relatively small percentage of what we're actually owed, and then leave them with a very sizable profit for both the British government and the Roman government and do their 40-60 split. And the amount that was being swaggered around was $150 trillion. Well, that sounds like an incredibly large amount of money, right? And it is. It's a lot of roast beef, as I said. However, it is a tiny fraction of what we're actually owed, both in terms of assets and in terms of credit on both sides. Consider that the current national debt that they're claiming is somewhere around $37 trillion, which is immense. And 150 trillion sounds like, well, gee, 4 or 5 times the national debt. Woohoo, whoopee, happy times are here again. And they even mentioned that it was from a trust fund. Well, but they don't go into any detail. And they don't identify what the trust fund was or who it actually belonged to. Well, that trust fund was set up in the Civil War era for British territorial soldiers and their dependents. So that just happens to be what they are owed. And they're trying to pull this switch where they give us what they were owed as our portion, when our portion is in the dodecatrillions, just immensely beyond imagination more than the 150 trillion that they're offering us, which was actually their part of what was provided for. So they're trying to switch identities with us again. Okay, they're trying to pretend that they're the lords of the manor and we're the gardener's grandchildren. Okay, they're trying to pull this on us, and they're trying to make it sound really good, and they're trying to make it really easy for Americans to just get this Treasury Direct account in their brand new quantum financial system, which, as I explained a couple of weeks ago, is also a fraud scheme. Because there is no quantum anything yet working on this planet, right? So they're trying to pull another fast one, all right? And we're not allowing it. We're saying, no, that 150 trillion is what was set aside for British territorial employees and their dependents. It's not a trust fund that was designed for us. It was for British soldiers and their families. It's not our trust fund. And by the way, we are owed this other clump of money and assets also. You see, they would love to be able to impersonate us and get away with it, because then they could claim all of the actual factual assets and only give us $150 trillion worth of credit, which they could pay off in what? Federal Reserve notes, which cost them virtually nothing to produce, right? So they're playing us as chumps again, and they're expecting us to go for it. And this past week, we just dropped the big bomb and said, not only no, hell no. And I want you to all understand why. Because we're not putting up with any more of these British substitution fraud schemes. We're not putting up with it in terms of the assets. We're not putting up with it in terms of the credit. And, we're not going to break out the dancing shoes and start singing Happy Days Are Here Again when all of us become the inheritors of their rather small, by comparison, trust fund, and they take our identity and inherit our very much larger trust funds. See, they played the same scheme all the way through, where they pretended to be the Federation. They pretended to be the state when they were actually the state of state. They pretended to be, now they're trying to pretend to be the quote unquote restored republic when they never had a republic to begin with. Okay, so they're just swindlers. These guys are brilliant, but they're swindlers. And they're hoping to make the killing of all killings on us. Now, obviously, we're not standing there like chumps and pretending to go along with any of this. We are calling them out on all of it. That, sorry, our mothers didn't knowingly waive our estates when we were babies. Sorry, we were never members of the British Merchant Maritime Personnel System. Sorry, you were never given a copyright or permission to use our names for any public purpose. Sorry, no thanks, but no thanks. That $150 trillion trust fund is what accrued to you as British territorial personnel and dependents, not what we're owed as Americans. We're just calling it right down the line. Nyet, 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 nyet. And, maybe for some of you, it would make sense to just give up at this point and accept Mr. Trump's offer and take the path of least resistance, claim to be British territorial citizens, and, go collect whatever portion of the Treasury fund set aside for British territorials is. But you're Americans. You're Americans, damn it. You're owed so much more, both in assets and in credit. And all they're offering to do is give you $150 trillion worth of credit that you would also then have to share with everybody else in the world that's been defrauded by them. And that then starts to really cut things down to size, doesn't it? It might seem like a lot of money to you because you've lived your whole life paying everybody else's debts, okay? But it's not anything compared to what you're actually owed. And the problem for them is that many men in the military and many women in the military are honorable people. And when they see the fact that the Americans are actually owed this much, and that, the British territorials are just owed that little wedge there on the side of the screen, they don't go for it. Especially if they happen to be Americans, and if they happen to have kids. And they realize that public and private, you're owed all of this. Well, why should you just step aside and pretend that you're a British territorial citizen? Why should you subject yourself to the British monarch when your ancestors spent 8 long years of mud and blood to sever a relationship with the British monarch, okay? So unless you were a real diehard Tory and just really a big British Anglophile, why would you accept their portion? And why would you claim to be one of them in order to get your little pittance payout in comparison? You wouldn't. If you know who you are, you'd stand there as we are and say, come on, stop joking. This is our inheritance over here. We're not accepting the inheritance of our hired help. We are accepting our inheritance as Americans. We are accepting the state trusts. We're accepting the actual American infant descendant estates that were created without our knowledge and without our permission, and which resulted in false registrations, and which then also resulted in us being registered instead of having our birth properly recorded. Okay, so all of these things are coming up, and meantime, we're being over in Britain. I don't know if you know this or not, but Britain has totally exploded. They're kept busy night and day with scandals erupting around the royal family as a distraction for what's actually going on. They've got this big flap over here. Oh, gee, all of a sudden it seems that Prince William has an illegitimate child fathered while he was married to Kate Middleton. And all sorts of garbage about things that happened in the past and what Queen Camilla is doing. You cannot imagine the tabloid type journalism going on in England right now. And it's all a distraction. It's sucking the attention of the British people away from what's actually happening, which is a population collapse and the influx of all these uh, people from the Middle East and all over the world coming in as undocumented, quote unquote, illegal aliens, and the fact that their quote unquote prime minister is selling off British land and assets at bargain basement prices. If I were a Brit, I would be even in more of a rage and renaissance than we are here, because they're being basically debased and used as the goats. Just a second, I have to take this call.
No problem. I'll pause the recording.
Sorry about that interruption. That was Harold.
Oh, how's he feeling? How's he doing?
He's doing great. He's going through a lot of changes, and they're changes for the better overall. But it's complex enough, so I'm going to have to make a kind of a full report in writing to explain all the ramifications of the treatment he received and the ongoing aftermath, the after treatment, because it has multiple stages, multiple things go on. It's really very interesting. I'm looking forward to having reached a logical endpoint to make a report on the next stage of his journey. But so far, so good. It's really quite, it's arduous in a way that I hadn't anticipated, or that he hadn't anticipated. But in the end, it's working out, and I'm sure that he'll be happy when it's all done.
How long is he undergoing this? This, I don't know if it's a series or
secondary treatment.
Uh-huh.
Well, it varies person to person. Now remember, Harold is 83, so he is not the youngest chicken in the coop. And it takes longer for older people. The older you are, the longer the recovery and everything takes. You've built up more road wear, and so it takes longer on average for someone in their 80s to recoup than someone in their 60s. And we just expect that, right? We know that. So in his case, it could take anywhere from 2 months to 6 months. And it just depends on his own unique DNA and what strengths and weaknesses he has and how his life has affected that DNA. And, it's just highly individual and unique. So it's pretty much impossible to say that, oh, it's going to only take you 2 months when it could take 6. And we just have to be patient and let him work through. And but there are sort of milestones in the process that tell you, okay, well, you got through this part. Now you got through that part. And we're waiting for Harold to get to that point where it makes sense to report on the second stage of his process. And then we'll go through the third stage of his process. And at the end of the day, we will hopefully see a man restored without the pain of arthritis, without any lingering bone breaks. It's really quite a miraculous process, but it's not instantaneous. I think many people have been misled to believe that the med beds are instantaneous, but they're not, and neither are the med baths, which he just went through. They are organic processes, and they do take time to develop the cure that you ultimately can expect to see from the process. And just as we got into the state that we're in, for the most part, pretty gradually, it takes more time to get your DNA tweaked and backed into the condition it should be in than it does Well, it just takes more time than you'd ever expect, given the advertising that we've all seen on the med beds and how wonderful they are and all this. They are wonderful so far as I can so far testify. At least the med bath process is pretty damned impressive. But not instantaneous and not without, it's not invasive. It's not like they're taking knives and sewing you up and all of that. It's not invasive like that at all. And so it isn't painful in the same way. Okay. But it is uncomfortable. It does have its, I guess you could say, uncomfortable is the best word, throughout the process. Taking the baths is not all that wonderful or happy. It's right at the edge of pain. And the aftermath, the detox that continues afterward, is difficult. And it can vary. Some people go through it a lot faster and a lot easier than others. Harold is having some substantial continuing detox issues. But then again, he's 83 years old and he's lived a pretty adventurous life. He's traveled all over the globe. He's put himself through quite a lot of stress and a wide variety of different environments and circumstances. So, he may be kind of a worst case scenario than a best case scenario in terms of getting through this second stage of detoxification, which continues on after the actual bath process. And he will also be given some very specialized medical preparations. And they are based on Ayurvedic medicine, which is thousands of years old. And I think it's important, people have probably heard the word Ayurvedic, but in this country, we don't really understand what that means. Ayurvedic medicine is thousands of years old, and actual Ayurvedic preparations may have, well, we use 150 herbs in our traditional medicinal cabinet. Ayurvedic medicine uses over 10,000 herbs, and they're all very precisely blended. They're all harvested according to ancient wisdom and tradition. I mean, even to the precise moment in the season, the precise phase of the moon, the precise time of the day when they are harvested. And then they are put together. Some of these preparations have 150 herbs, all very precisely blended. So Ayurvedic medicine is in terms of herbal lore and use of the traditional pharmacopoeia of the earth, it's just infinitely older and infinitely more precise than anything that we have available here. And so part of this is to take the Ayurvedic herbs that are specifically indicated by your actual individual condition. And the way that they analyze this is not only the DNA that gets analyzed to a fried crisp back in this process, but also they use voice and energetic imprinting so that the doctors actually talk to you, and in the course of talking to you, they get your voice imprint, right? And that then indicates the energetic issues that you're having in addition to the physical issues, right? And the physical issues are used like sort of a milestone. You know, if you have psoriasis, click, or if you have gout, click, if you have thinning hair, click. All of these things are indicators. They're like signals going beep, bleep, bleep, bleep. Okay, and they triangulate all of this because each one of these little symptoms that are causing us pain or trouble are indicative of, which system is in trouble, which system needs correction. Is it something, the bone? Is it the nerve? Is it the skin? And they actually triangulate a picture of what's happening in your body. And they specifically work out a plan of this particular preparation for this at this dosage for you individually. There's no such thing as mass marketed medicine. I mean, there are things that you take, sort of like we take aspirin, but when it comes down to individual analysis, when you're sitting there with an Ayurvedic doctor, you might need 10 times the normal dosage of something, but he will be able to figure that out from how the other symptoms are triangulating together. Okay, so it's very specialized. It's a very unique, individual-oriented prescriptions of these ancient preparations of up to 150 different herbs, many of which are not available in the United States. So you can expect to have Ayurvedic medicine playing a much greater role in the future in terms of healing. And because this is very specialized in that it's specific to you, and it's at the dosages that your particular situation and DNA require, it's much faster than anything that we typically imagine. We take things for 6 weeks. We take herbal and supplemental things. We take it for a year, maybe, to see some results. Ayurvedic medicine isn't like that. The goal of Ayurvedic medicine is to get you balanced and back on your feet and happy and healthy and performing the baby as soon as possible. And so the effect of these medications is very pinpoint, specific, and fast. I mean, fast, like within hours. You take one of these little pills and boom. So the effect is supposed to be extremely rapid and extremely noticeable. So, for example, say you have suffered with plaque psoriasis all your life. Gone. And it can seem like magic to us because, of course, we're only familiar with allopathic medicine, which has extreme limitations from the get-go that were dictated by the Rockefellers. Of course, the standard bearers of all things, right? And so allopathic medicine is more geared to battlefield wounds, setting of bones, sawing off of limbs, things of that nature that are kind of mechanical. And we're still in our infancy as far as actual medications go. But that's about to change. We are about to discover the wealth of Ayurvedic medicine and to experience this for ourselves. And that will change everything for everyone. Many things that are incurable here are routinely cured in other countries. Like arthritis. How many people here suffer from arthritis of some kind or another? It's been routinely curable in about 3 weeks in Japan for decades. It's been routinely curable in India for centuries. And so here we are suffering with these decayed, broken, swollen, hideously painful joints when we don't have to be, except that it's so extremely profitable for the allopathic medical industry. Okay, we could be taking a pill and be done with arthritis of all kinds incredibly fast and never have to deal with it again. But we don't talk to people from other countries. We don't have the wealth of their knowledge and their culture, okay? And so we suffer. And we're kept in this little box like, animals in a pen. And if it's profitable for our owners to have arthritis, well, then we're going to have arthritis. And it doesn't matter that, our neighbors 2 pens over have found the cure, 10,000 years ago, all right? Well, that's about to end. We're about to break out of that enforced artificial ignorance and enter into a whole new world of healing that has always been potentially available to us, but which was selfishly withheld from us because of profit motives. And I'm sad to say that once again, the Brits are the star players in all of this, even though the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds certainly played their parts. The British, remember, were the ones that created the British Raj back during Queen Victoria's reign and rampaged throughout India and plundered the Maharajas and subjugated the people and pillaged and raped and burned and murdered their way across India. Well, in the process, whether they liked it or not, they did brush up against Ayurvedic medicine and learn of its advantages. And those British soldiers whose lives were saved by Indian practitioners of Ayurvedic medicine brought that knowledge and those medications back to Britain. So the British elite has had access to Ayurvedic medicine, and the rest of us have had to go suffer.
Well, a lot of people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. So this is welcome information and knowledge. I know many people on the call have not only suffered, but have already started experimenting with, medicines that are not in the allopathic model. So you're talking to the right crowd here, Anna.
Well, and just in terms of general well-being, your energy, your sense of peace, so many people are beset by anxiety. And it's because our food and our water has been poisoned and polluted. There are many different vitamins that we need that we simply don't have. B17 used to be part of everybody's food. Now we don't have B17. There are so many examples of that. Magnesium. Magnesium is absolutely critical to our health, but we can't possibly get enough of it from our mineral stripped soil and our pathetic little plants that are only able to survive because they're given large amounts of artificial inorganic fertilizer made from oil. Many people don't realize that the anhydrous ammonia and all these other inorganic fertilizers are made from oil. They're made from crude oil. Okay, and so they've just basically stripped everything down to the most essential components and dumped that on the plants to make the plants grow unnaturally large, and then they've tweaked and twerked everything to make them give gigantic harvests of low quality produce, but they don't care about the nutritional side of the product. It looks like a nice big healthy lovely apple, right? So it must be just brim full of nutrition. Wrong. It's brim full of all sorts of weird stuff. It's been genetically modified. It's been artificially fertilized. It's been deprived of access to all sorts of things that are good for you. And in the end, it's been doused with pesticides and it's been doused with wax so that you've got this beautiful looking apple, but it's poisoned, literally. You ever stop and think about the poisoned apple that the queen gives to Snow White? Well, we've got our own version. And it's because of the agricultural industry seeking profit above the actual, and appearance, profit and appearance above the actual nutritional value and use that we as living beings have for that apple, right? They've actually made it look better, but not taste better. They made them look better, but not, they've drained the minerals and the nutrients away from it. And they've done that all across the board. It's all about appearance. It has to look good, but it doesn't have to be good. So everything has been concentrated on appearance instead of actuality, okay? Same thing with white bread. It has to look good. It can't have any little flecks of bran in it, okay? It has to be soft. It has to last forever. This is the crazy demand of the food industry. But it doesn't have to have any real benefit to you. It can be reduced to nothing but carbs with sugar. It can be nothing but a pure lump of sugar laced with pesticides and bactericides and things that will poison bread mold. And besides all these preservatives, we can just take all of the actual natural nutrients out of the wheat and replace it with what? Bromine, a poison. Our
Well,
bread has been poisoned, our water's been poisoned, our soil has been poisoned, our fruits have been poisoned, our fields in total, our air has been polluted. And this has been done, guess what? according to the book of Isaiah. These people are nuts. There's no other way to describe it. If you read the book of Isaiah, you will see how the Israelites in captivity poisoned their Babylonian captors, and they poisoned the bread, they poisoned the water, they poisoned the wine. They made sure that their Babylonian captives or captors were miserable and sick and weak. And they did this using food and drink. And it's all laid out as a war plan in the book of Isaiah. The very same thing has been done to us. Now, we weren't the captors. We didn't do anything to Israel. In fact, we were used and scapegoated to pay for Israel. Okay? And we're still paying for Israel. We hear that Donald Trump is beginning to wake up and has turned his back on Netanyahu because of the Gaza genocide. Okay? Well, if so, well, let's applaud. It's a step in the right direction. Now let's stop giving Israel hundreds of billions of dollars to spend on armaments to attack its neighbors. You know, starving 2.3 million Palestinians to death is not anything about self-defense. It's just a pure genocide, period. And, you know, they're dragging America into this. Our U.S. Subcontractors are giving our money away for this. Here's a shocking little statistic for you. We spent, during the Biden administration, $66 billion giving illegal immigrants everything, buying businesses for them, buying homes for them, giving them generous monthly stipends, giving them cars, you know, just a free boat situation, right? 66 billion with a B. Okay? You know how much we spent on our veterans? 3 billion.
Wow. Wow.
If I were, you know, I wasn't in the service, my husband was. But if I were a veteran or a veteran's wife, which I happen to be, and a veteran's daughter, which I happen to be, that little statistic, which was brought forward by a congresswoman, no doubt, in the Congress, that little factoid all by itself would be enough and is enough to make me see red, to make me want to choke people. You know, that little flying factoid right there, the partisan politics, the cronyism, the selfishness, and the greed of what these people did and are trying to continue to do is enough to make you want to declare that, hey, folks, guess what? They're only pretending to occupy any public offices. They weren't elected in any public elections. They're actually nothing but corporate officers. And that's nothing but a corporate Congress. They have no state immunity. Why don't we just arrest them and have done with this whole phony process? Because they are verifiably, obviously, certifiably doing something illegal and fraudulent. And they are not representing us. They are representing their corporation, and they're misapplying and misusing our assets to make profits for who? For them, not for us. You know, talk about sucking hind tits on the hog. The veterans get 3 billion and the illegal immigrants get 66 billion of our money. That's how the Congress is spending our money. Yeah.
It really is a shame because there's been so many people that have lost their lives thinking that they were defending America.
And what they were doing was acting as cheap mercenaries.
Mm-hmm.
Another issue that people need to be aware of, and I'm using this, I know I'm being inappropriate here. I know that this is supposed to be coordinator training and and instead it's sort of like coordinator update, okay? But one of the things you're going to see is that in China, there has been this huge problem of suddenly all the Chinese are vanishing. And it's not just the Chinese people that are vanishing, entire villages are vanishing. Okay? They're just poof, no longer there. And at the same time that this is happening, the Chinese government is, it has stopped publishing certain vital statistics. So suddenly we don't have any statistics on the use of crematoriums. Suddenly we don't have any accurate statistics on population. Suddenly they completely stopped sharing any kind of data on disease parameters. You know, how many people died from smallpox? How many people died from diphtheria? How many people died from bubonic plague? Whatever it is, they stopped publishing anything like that. And the eyewitness accounts that we're getting out of China, both from Chinese themselves and from relatives of Chinese people in other countries, and from visitors to China now, is that it's turned into a giant ghost town. And that, you know, there's like maybe 300 million Chinese left out of 1.2 billion. So even if you buy the argument that the Chinese always inflated their population, and that their actual population was more like 800 billion, you're still looking at the disappearance of 500 billion people at a minimum. I mean, 500 million. And as a result, real estate in China has tanked. And instead, what is happening, which is totally inexplicable unless you account for the takeover of the British-backed corporate elite, is investment in gigantic construction projects. I mean, gigantic.
Wait, where? In China?
In China. At the
Oh.
same time that the population is gone and entire villages are vaporizing, you're seeing a gigantic construction project, which only makes sense in corporate world view. If you had to ask me on my flat little feet what I think about this, I think that the corporatists corrupted the Chinese government, and that the CCP, the Communist Chinese Party, became corrupted in the years after Reagan opened up this Chinese trade rapprochement, and that a good deal of the money that's disappeared out of the trade balance that was siphoned off must have gone to Communist Party members who are now being blackmailed to allow all this to go on. Because this has the imprint of Britain all over it. Once again, the British have tried to undermine the Chinese since the mid-1800s. They've done this in various ways. They introduced the opium trade to China. They created a consumer base for opium in China, and then they supplied the opium. It was the Brits who did that to the Chinese. And the Chinese eventually revolted and found ways of breaking the British stranglehold and getting rid of the problem. But the British first wanted to undermine the Chinese. Then they set their sights on controlling the Chinese labor force and basically using them as cheap mercenaries and as cheap labor. So they put all these industrial complexes and you know, engineered the siphoning off of American industry to China. And other countries too. They siphoned off Japanese, and they siphoned off Indian, and they siphoned off Russian, and everything they could siphon, they siphoned to China. And so they were using Chinese slave labor, essentially, to produce all the products. Well, and then when that got recognized for what it was, and everybody started looking at our analysis of, yeah, the rats have moved their headquarters to China, then people started looking again and realizing that, number one, they were benefiting from slave labor, And who wants to benefit from slave labor? Raise your hands. And that China was no longer China. It was increasingly being wagged by the British territorialist tail. And they were being led into making bad investments, which were then used as a debt club over their heads. They were individually being bribed, which led to more corruption, and finally into the COVID debacle, which is a direct attack against China's greatest resource, its people. China may not have had much in terms of natural resources and mining and all those sorts of things compared to other countries, but China had people. They had intelligent people in a 5,000-year culture that was peaceful. And so their labor force, while being a challenge in terms of being able to feed and house and educate and clothe and keep up with everything that a large population demands, their wealth, their resource was their people. The inventiveness of their people, the hard work of their people. Their labor force was their crown jewel. Their labor force was what made China a world power. And they have effectively undermined China's labor force in order to subjugate China. And now they're draining everything that they contributed to China. They're draining away the industries, and they're draining away the population, probably through germ warfare. I will just be blatant about that. And they're collapsing the whole net in China so that the Chinese are defeated without even a fight. And I'm sorry to see that. I'm sorry to say that.
Well, they're doing that here too. I mean, they're doing
trying to do that here too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not nearly as successful because the people are waking up, and because the politicians are vulnerable, and because our military won't go along with it. That's why we're not suffering the same exact fate as China. And instead, the quote unquote battle is being taken back to Europe to an increasing extent, because politically and economically, that's where it all comes from. All this rot comes from Europe. And so it's finding its way home again. The karmic cycle is turning. And now that people are realizing the source of the problem, it's coming home to roost. Unfortunately, as it comes home to roost, it's not actually hitting the people that are truly responsible. It's hitting the storefronts instead. It's hitting those that have been used as the scapegraces in storefronts. Just like they constantly talk about America this and Americans that. They never say the US, and they never explain what the US is. They just take this big broad brush and blame it on the Americans. Blame it on the Americans. Well, it's not the Americans directing any of this. It's not the Americans profiting from this in the main. I mean, sure, there are some crappy US industrialists, the same old cadre of robber barons who are profiting off of this. But even they mostly live offshore. Most of them live on private islands and in foreign countries. They don't live here anymore. They shouldn't even be counted as Americans. Just because they're an heir of Standard Oil doesn't mean they're Americans. It's crazy. America gets slapped and blamed all the time for horrible things. And the Americans are doing nothing but being scapegoated and racketeered and coerced and plundered to pay the bills for these assholes. So, next time you hear America did this bad thing or America did this other bad thing, raise your little voice and say, oh no, that wasn't us. That was the United States Corporation, or that was the United States of America Incorporated, a British territorial corporation that really doesn't have anything to do with us other than we hired them to do specific services. But anyway, a lot of the storefronts are being blamed for evils perpetuated by these corporations which have used them as storefronts, just as we are being blamed for the evils of the United States Incorporated and the evils of the United States of America Incorporated. You know, the British people are being blamed for the evils of their royal families and the evils of their government of the inner city of London and the evils of the government of Westminster. Okay, the Belgians are being blamed for the evils of the Belgian royal family. And everybody's being blamed for all this stuff that they aren't actually guilty of. You know, what are we guilty of? We didn't even know. We were being used and abused ourselves, and we were being fed a line of BS about 16 feet deep, and lied to on the news media every night and every day. We didn't do these things. It wasn't our plan. We didn't consciously or willingly use our military forces as mercenaries. That wasn't us. Hello. That wasn't the intent of our sons and daughters going off and signing up. No. It certainly wasn't the intent of all those poor souls that were drafted against their will to go over to Southeast Asia and defend French rubber plantations. No, that wasn't the plan at all. They were all lied to. They were all told, oh, well, Yankee Doodle went to town and, you're here to defend America. But in a way, and the criminals, the ones actually responsible, will tell you, well, we told you that it was to defend democracy. Don't you have sense enough to know that America isn't a democracy? The only democracy anywhere within thousands of miles is the democracy of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Believe it or not, you've all been fighting for Puerto Rico, I guess. And you've all been considered the same kind of U.S. capital C citizen as the Puerto Ricans. You've all been subjugated to the British monarch, whether you knew it or not. And you've all been used as really, 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 really cheap mercenaries, and you've been saddled with paying off the war debts of the British monarch and the Pope, acting as the Roman pontiff. Both. So as they've engaged in all these adventurous wars for profit all over the world, you've been the goats. We have been the goats. We've been the ones coerced and profiteered and racketeered to pay all the debts. Okay, but we didn't do it. We didn't plan it. We didn't even know we were participating in it. And we certainly didn't volunteer knowingly to go do any of these things. It was not on our playbook or in our hearts to go defend the democracy of Puerto Rico or the British Commonwealth in general, or any of the British Commonwealth corporations that they so gratuitously created in our names. Okay? It's the same thing with the UN. The UN organization is getting plastered with a very, very black brush, when actually it was just a very few of their leaders who were corrupt, blackmailed, okay, that allowed the UN corporation to use the UN organization as a storefront. So once again, the UN as an organization is not bad. It's done a lot of good. But the UN corporation standing in back of it, using it as a storefront, is one of the most corrupt and evil organizations on earth. So you see people bandy it about and they say, the UN, and everybody goes, and that's unfortunate, because a good organization that was used as a storefront for a bad organization via the corruption and the blackmailing of individuals is taking the blame for something that remains in the background. Most people don't even know that there is such a thing as the UN corporation. Most of the people on Earth don't know that the UN corporation was a Nazi corporation that was created in France during the Second World War, and that the same evil corporation has had its hands and fingers in every pie from here to the Philippines and back. Okay? But that's the case, just as the incorporated versions of the United States and the United States of America, which are actually just corporations like any other corporation, have used America and the American people and our country and our federation as storefronts and have blamed us for all this violent racketeering and profiteering and war for profit activity when we didn't even know what was going on. And we certainly weren't told, okay? So the British people, they've suffered as long or longer than we have under the boots of a foreign occupation. The Windsors are not British, they're German. And for the past 300 years, the British Isles have been under occupation by a foreign royal family, a German royal family. Hello. And they have suffered. They have lost their land, they've lost their identity. Now they're practically losing their minds. They're being inundated with all these quote unquote refugees who are entering the country illegally and being treated like returning royalty and at the expense of the British taxpayers and land holders. And the monarchy is a complete and utter shambles. Of course, it's been increasingly a shambles for many years, but it's just completely gone off the rails in the past 6 months. And all again, these figureheads, these storefronts are being blamed. And the actual cause, which is the Germans and the incorporation of the government as merely essentially a German corporation, is not even getting any attention. The people in Britain are just as clueless or more so than we ever were. All right, they're lost. They're standing there watching this happen to their country and their population and their royal family and all their institutions, and they're just kind of shell-shocked, standing there going, well, this can't be happening, can it? Well, it is. They're being overrun with refugees. Keir Starmer is auctioning everything off at bargain basement prices. The Bank of England is folded. The Bank of Scotland won't be far behind. They're going down the tubes, and it's at the hands of people that they think of as their own members of parliament. But those members of parliament have been bought off, blackmailed, and otherwise mentally incapacitated to the point where they're just standing there going, like so many goldfish in a bowl. There are a few members of parliament who are awake enough, who are standing up and going, oh, no, we can't let that happen. And they are gaining ground. The Reform Party is gaining a lot of ground, but even the Reform Party isn't truly up to speed. They don't know their own history any better than most average Brits do. And so they're at a loss to explain how all of this is happening. Well, it's because the Windsors aren't the Windsors. It's because in 1840, when Prince Albert, what is his actual name? Anyway, it's Saxe Coburg Gotha, okay? When he married the young Queen Victoria, he became the controller of his wife's fortune. So what did he do? He took his wife's fortune and he gave it to his German investment club buddies, who had been in the process and in the practice of managing business for countries, whole countries, for what? Let's see, 1,600 years? Remember the Hanseatic League? Okay, this was a system by which German bankers and merchants did all of the monetary and investment work for the government in exchange for being able to tax the people of that country. And the German bankers and businessmen, the merchant fleet and everything that they commanded, were so organized and superior that they could make greater profits for the king than anything that the local people could do. And so these managers were brought in to run the entire governments of countries like Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Finland. And they just came in and they were the management. They were the imported bureaucrats who ran the money, who ran the credit, who did all of the international trading. who funded the merchant fleets, who ran all the personnel associated with this, who did the tax services, who made all the investments. This was the Hanseatic League, okay? So fast forward into the 1900s, or 1800s rather, and who did Prince Albert turn to with his wife's fortune? The German banking cartel, the German managers. He turned it all over to them.
Wow. Do you think that they end up working with foreigners because the foreigners aren't going to experience the kind of punishments if they used locals? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
I do.
foreigners
Quite
aren't
possibly.
in the contract. They're not in the contract with that local place, that local de facto government. So they can essentially not be subjected to punishment.
Right, they're not naturally subject to that particular country's laws.
Right.
And so if that country gives them a special dispensation, which the monarchs did, okay,
Hmm.
then they can get away with murder. And, that is one of the factors. We have the same thing here. But again, you can see how that German management system was employed in Britain. And the British people were essentially being taxed by banks, by foreign banks, which is exactly what's happened here. We have been taxed directly, individually, by foreign banks.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's the same old Hanseatic League system brought forward into the present day, and it really got its impetus. It got its foot in the door with Prince Albert giving them his wife's fortune to manage, which they did. And what they immediately started doing was investing in war, and they started the whole system with the after Prince Albert died, I think he had a moderating influence because the evidence shows that while he was alive, the investments went toward industrial development and infrastructure and scientific pursuits and all sorts of things that are arguably very beneficial. But as soon as he died, his heartbroken wife didn't know what to do and began relying on these bankers and these basically bureaucrats. And what did we have? Well, then all of a sudden we had the quote unquote enfranchisement of the British working class. And what that really meant, as we now know, had nothing to do with voting and everything to do with unlawful conversion of living people to the status of things, mere corporate franchises. So the government then came in and seized all their private property, all their land holdings, and their labor as collateral backing the company, right? Or as they say in Britain, the firm. It's the firm in Britain and it's the company here. But anyway, they enfranchised and they made the word enfranchise synonymous with voting, and they sold everybody on the idea that it was their right to vote and that they should vote. And actually that was just it was just a way of getting people to sign up and quote unquote voluntarily register themselves as British citizens instead of Englishmen. They pulled the same kind of deceit there that they pulled here, where people should have been recognized and recording their status as Englishmen, as Scots, as Irish, and instead they created the British citizen label and made that a corporate appendage, a label in which you are accepting a secondary, second class status, political status, and agreeing to operate as a thing, as a corporate franchisee, and as a voter instead of an elector. Okay, they used all these parallel language tricks and seeming synonyms that weren't really synonyms to trick people. And so the British working class, which is feeling rather downtrodden and stultified and trapped in the industrial revolutionary mode of the industrialists cracking down on them and paying them pittance wages in order to increase the profits of the industry, see this glowing opportunity in the distance. They can be a voter, they can have a voice, they can vote. And voting was held up as this great big prize. Even here in this country, we had enfranchisement for women, give the women the vote. Well, that was just a means of reducing the women to the level of corporate franchises. Okay, that's what enfranchisement means. But we weren't told that. Neither were they. Everybody went along thinking that voting was such a great and wonderful thing, when actually the quote unquote privilege of being a voter came with unseen strings, which meant that you became a ward of the state and a franchisee and a mere corporate subcontractor or corporate franchise, enfranchisement, of the British Crown Corporation. And they could use you and your labor and everything that you owned or had any interest in as collateral. Well, what did they do? They took the collateral that they got from the British working classes being enfranchised, right? And used that as their stake, their money to create the British Raj mercenary force and send them all over to India and begin the British Raj occupation of India. That's what they did with their initial investment after Prince Albert died, was that they began war for profit and maintained war for profit continually up until this day. They were just now trying to rattle the sabers in Iran. They were going to take over Iran, and they were going to take over the Ukraine. It was just more of the same bull. And it's been this way for 160 years. They've been using the enfranchisement of new populations to fund their war profiteering, and then just continuing to garner more and more assets, and using the assets to create more credit for themselves, and then using the credit, spending the credit to promote war and more theft, more lies, more mercenary activity. And this has been going on unchecked and even unrecognized for 160 years. And by the time you wake up and you really look at it, you realize, oh my God, she's right. Well, hello, it's right there in front of our faces. And we have to do something about it now. We can't just sit on our rumps and pretend that it'll go away, because as long as they're making money off of this, they're going to continue to try to make money off of it, which is another whole conversation.
Well,
anyway.
And there's another word too, when they talk about civilized nations, right?
Yes.
Civilized, not ever explaining what it is when someone is, quote, a civil servant or in a civil system. And we think that somehow, civil has something to do with civic. And then we have, it's this whole head game that happens when you're going through regular school, yeah.
The pyramid.
The pyramid, exactly. The top-down pyramid.
It's well, and people need to pay attention, because what's another name for a Ponzi scheme?
Like a pyramid scheme.
Pyramid scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been the unlucky victims of an outrageous pyramid scheme throughout all of these governments, which have endeavored to use the assets and the labor of the actual owners of the country for their own advantage and aims. And they've gotten away with it, because the rest of us haven't wised up and looked at it and gone, I don't recall America being a democracy.
Well, people will defend democracy like to the bitter end, right, until they find out what a scam it is, you know what I mean, and how wrong it is for our country.
Well, just wait until they understand money. Yes, that's going to make all of the political shenanigans look small by comparison. But we think about this, and oftentimes I'm on the bandwagon, and I'm saying, well, the Brits are at the bottom of it again. The Brits are at the bottom of it again. The Brits are at the bottom of it again, and it's monotonous, because the Brits are always at the bottom of it. You find them at the bottom of every dog pile you dig into. They're like the maggots that just instantly appear in every piece of rotting meat, right? But it's not the Brits. It's the Germans who have been manipulating the Brits ever since Prince Albert and Queen Anne 100 years before him. Actually, Prince Albert was just coming back in the door, right? Because Queen Anne is where it all started. And that was 1700. Okay, so it was the reign of Queen Anne when all this corporatist crap started. And this is when the Germans basically took over as the quote unquote royal family of Britain. And this is when Great Britain, the company, or as they say, the firm, was established as the government in international and world affairs.
Mhm.
And so they replaced their governments, their traditional customary governments of England and Scotland, were overcome at that point by making a joint venture called Great Britain, and then beginning to call the countries Great Britain, and
Mhm.
beginning to enfranchise the people, or basically, instead of being an Englishman, you were suddenly a British citizen, right? You lost your nationality
Mhm.
in a process of being identified as a citizen serving a company, right?
Right.
And then that company in commerce became what? The British Crown. And so what you have here is a gradual and surreptitious usurpation of national government by um, dishonorable and largely business associated entities.
Mhm.
Suddenly you had the Great Britain company taking over and doing all of the work under a Hanseatic League type system uh, for the British government, right? The actual English government and the actual Scottish government were gone. Okay, they were vacated in a practical sense. All the law remained on the books. All of the constitutions remained on the books. But guess what? They were no longer acting in the land and soil jurisdiction. They were suddenly in the jurisdiction of the sea. And in the jurisdiction of the sea, an entirely different kind of law uh, is in operation, and entirely different kinds of persons instead of people uh, inhabit that jurisdiction. And as a result, the actual national government of England and the actual national government of Scotland were vacated during the reign of Queen Anne, circa 1700, just a few years after the quote unquote English Civil War. Okay. And then you see 150 years later, they basically repeated that same shtick in this country, where once again you had a civil war that wasn't really a civil war, and you had a um, a company come in as the de facto government in a different jurisdiction entirely. And so again, the constitutions stayed on the books. All of the public law and everything stayed there as if nothing had changed. But suddenly, it doesn't matter because that jurisdiction was vacated. And instead, uh, everybody is now presumed to be a employee or elected official of the company. And those of you who are veterans of Vietnam will recognize the lingo, how everything was about the company. And a lot of people assumed that was the CIA, but no, no, it included the CIA, but it was much larger than the CIA. It was actually a corporation, okay? And then there was a company, a British territorial company, and a Roman municipal corporation. And both of these things have usurped against the national governments here and in throughout the Commonwealth, everywhere. The constitutions are still there, but the population has been hijacked and trafficked via this process of enfranchisement and registration into these foreign jurisdictions of the sea and the air. And as a result, all these countries have been victimized, just as we have. And the Brits, this started in Britain, not exactly in its current form, but it started essentially the same process, started in Britain in the years right after their quote unquote Civil War, with the reign of Queen Anne and the change over from a British or English royal family to a German royal family. So when you look at Queen Elizabeth, or you look at Prince Charles, or, just take a real good look at these people. They're not English. They don't even look English. They don't look Scottish. They look exactly like what they are, and that is Germans. You can just hop across the channel and look around, and there you'll find them. Little lookalikes of these folks. Just take a look at Reinhard Heydrich, who was SS General Himmler's right-hand man, and probably the most intelligent Nazi in the entire pantheon of Nazis. And he looks exactly like Prince Charles, or King Charles now, except that he was blonde. If you get them in profile, if you get the left-hand profile, they're indistinguishable. And that's why whenever you see or saw photographs of Prince Charles, or now King Charles, you'll notice that you never see a left profile. I mean, the resemblance is cookie cutter.
Would that be like his left when you're looking at him, or like
It would be his left.
his driver's side?
You never see it.
Wow, interesting. I never noticed that.
Well, and look up a photograph of Reinhard Heydrich, Heydrich. He was Hitler's, basically his right hand, and he had this very nasal voice, and he is the one who announced the final solution. Okay.
Wow.
These
We're all going to be looking up Reinhard Heydrich now.
These people are Germans. They have always been Germans. They've always had the bulk of their finances in German hands. Okay. So how do you account for the Second World War or the First World War? Well, you take it as Germans fighting Germans. You take it the Hanoverians taking their revenge on everybody else in Germany. And why the Jews? Well, because the Jews were, number one, in on the banking and knew how the banking worked. So they were in a position to rat them out, okay? But also because the Jews were heavily invested.
Right.
The Jews were the creditors of both regimes. So
that's why they ended up being practically exterminated, was because the Germans didn't want to, the Nazis didn't want to have to pay them back, right?
Kill the creditors.
Kill the creditors.
And notice what they did with the gays. And all, anybody that was not a mainstream Protestant heterosexual and monogamous pair, right? Look at what they did. Hitler deliberately cultivated a political party that openly welcomed homosexuals at a time when homosexuality had been widely condemned and criminalized in most of the Western nations. Well, Hitler opened up the doors, and these people could suddenly serve their country, and they could, they could rise into prestigious political offices as brown shirts. Okay, and in Hitler's rise to power in Germany, these homosexuals were the core, the base of the brown shirts. They contributed untold hours of work, and they contributed their personal fortunes. They invested heavily in Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, which was, you look at it and you go, this is the party that's preaching Kinder, Kirche, and Küche? Really? This is the party that is snuggled up to the Pope? Yeah? And yet they're, wide open and so progressive on all these issues of independent choice and sexuality, and welcoming all these gay guys into their brown shirts, and, all these elitists are doing this for real? Okay. Well, what happened?
It was
Hitler
a mousetrap.
finally got into real power. He finally became the chancellor,
Mhm.
and the purge began. And of course, they knew who all these gay people were because they'd come out in support of them. And then they went back in and they murdered them. They
Yep.
did just wholesale, they rounded them up, they arrested them, they charged them, and they murdered them by the busload. And the brown shirts disappeared. And guess what? The Nazi SS, the black shirts, appeared. And this was the reality. This was the core of the German army, and the Luftwaffe and everything changed. And they had this super, super conservative, super militant, overall, and completely fascist, completely
Mhm.
strict, okay, uh, authoritarian cadre replaced the brown shirts. Well, what do you think? Did they just go through this entire process again in America with all this, and in Europe, in Britain too, and Canada, all over the place? Did they just do the same exact thing? Yes, they did.
Yep.
All this LBQTQR, whatever, they cast a very wide net to identify all the people that they consider perverts. And it's not for a good purpose. When they do this, they are entrapping those people, identifying them so that they can later go back and kill them. These people are nuts. They are mean. They are sneaky. And they did it during the Nazi run up, and they just did it again. And people are just going, do, 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 let's fly the rainbow flag. We're so inclusive. Learn from history.
Mhm.
Okay, this was Joe Biden. Well, who knows how much of his brain was functioning? He might have been sincere, but the people behind the curtain, no, the people behind the curtain are the black shirts waiting to kill the brown shirts. Their mission is to identify and eradicate what they think of as the enemy, as the perverts, as the unholy, as the whatever. Who knows what these people think? But they have a history of doing this exact thing, of suckering in the support of the gay LGBTQ community, right? And then watching and exposing and knowing, who came out of the closet. And then they go back and they very methodically kill those people.
Well, and what they're doing to the kids, though, Anna, I mean, there's so many innocent kids that are being brought up in these indoctrination centers that are essentially twisting their mind. They're doing gender bending.
They have to.
Mm.
And you know why?
Why?
Because they put so many animal hormones in the meat that
Oh.
the kids are being damaged physically,
Mhm.
physiologically. They're being damaged. They're being damaged as embryos in their mother's womb
Yeah, they
because
got to
of the
cover their
crap that they've
tracks.
put in the food.
Mhm.
And so you're going to have people that are born as hermaphrodites. You're going to have people that are born with no sex at all. You're going to have baby boys that are born with little stubby penises like that, they'll never be able to impregnate anybody except by in vitro, you know. So
Yeah.
the damage that they've done with all these chemicals and with all these hormones that have been fed into the animals and that we then eat in our meat is causing damage to the kids. And so they're trying to get out in front of it and make some sort of an excuse and say, oh, well, there were always these people in the population. But this isn't going to, this next phase, this transgenderism, is going to be based on actual physical characteristics that have been caused by the pollution of our food. Okay? And they're going to try to excuse that, and they're going to try to say that, oh, well, there were always these people here, and we just didn't see them because it was so taboo.
We needed better diagnosis.
Yeah, they're going to pretend that all of these kids showing up with autism just were never identified before, which is pure bullshit.
Oh, yeah,
These
total
kids
bull.
these kids who are showing up in vast numbers of autistic behaviors and stuff have been harmed by the vaccine.
Yep,
And
100%.
it's the same kind of snow job that they did with the polio vaccine. They developed the polio vaccine and blamed it on a virus, an unseen, unknowable virus when actually the problem was caused by nerve poisons being used as pesticides getting into the water.
Yep.
So these people are nuts. They are completely 100% screw loose. They
Yeah.
do not think like normal people think. They
Mhm.
don't do as normal people do.
Mhm.
And they're clever and they're scheming, but they're not really smart because they get the backlash of what they do and they
Mhm.
don't even realize it. And
Right.
they're in this script where they keep, it's like they've got an old steamer trunk in the attic full of all of the different schemes and all of the different cons that they've played over the years. And periodically they go up and they find one and they dust it off and they play it again. Just like I just observed to you, what they did with the English Civil War, which was a mercenary conflict too, they played that out and they created this phony Great Britain company and they passed it off as a country when it's never been a country. Okay. But they passed that off and then they created British citizenship instead of English or Scottish. You see, they did all that back in the 1700s, and then 150 years later, they used the same exact template to come over here, pass off a mercenary conflict as a civil war, which they did with the quote unquote English Civil War, come over here, create a company called the United States of America Incorporated, and then start passing off US citizenship. Exactly. It's the same template. They used it in England and Ireland and Scotland and Wales, and they did the same thing here. Same exact template. Just like the Brits came up with their own version of the Roman dead baby scam. Same template, just tweaked a little bit, you know. The English quote unquote Civil War was supposedly over religion. They got the Protestants and the Catholics to fight it out. But it was still a mercenary war. It was still not declared. It was still not proper. Okay. And the result was a mercenary result. Okay. And over here, they used slavery as the excuse, even though slavery had precious little to do with it, as even Abraham Lincoln admitted on a number of occasions. He just came right out and said, this doesn't have anything to do with slavery. Okay. But slavery was used as the excuse. And so all this stuff is phony. It's all phony baloney. It's all, you just have to be on your feet, kids. And you have to be thinking, and you have to be looking at the history, and you have to be responding appropriately. Because the moment you don't respond appropriately, that's their signal that they have to roll up the canvas again. They have to move on. They can't pull that particular con on us. Okay. And we have to keep saying no. We have to keep saying, no, we don't want your $150 trillion trust fund. We want our own dodecatrillion trust fund. Okay. We're not going to be confused about this. We know who we are. We know who you are. And you should know who you are too. And we have to keep bringing that forward. No, we're sorry. You can't restore any republic because you never had a republic. We're the only ones here who had a republic and who can restore it. But at the moment, we're acting as the Federation. Okay? It's this simple. You've all heard about the delegated powers, right? Well, ask yourself this question. Who delegated those powers?
The
Here we
Federation.
are, the delegators. Okay? It's that simple. They're all working on and exercising delegated powers. We're the delegators. So, it's with all of this, we have to cut through the mustard. We have to be aware, and we have to be vocal about it without being mean. Um, you know, most of these people are opportunists. They found themselves in a situation where they didn't plan for it, but they saw the opportunity and then they got drawn into something, right? So we would say to you, we're not against Donald Trump. We're not against Elon Musk. We're not going to take any wooden nickels. We're not confused about who we are or what we're owed, okay? We're not being mean to anybody. We're just claiming what's owed to us. We're enforcing the contracts that are owed to us. We are claiming back property that was purloined from us. We are ending a system of known fraud and racketeering. We're putting an end to the dead baby scam once and forever, whether it's in the jurisdiction of the air or the jurisdiction of the sea or the jurisdiction of the land. We're doing away with the dead baby scam. All three of those phony trusts have to go. And at the end of the day, we're going to be left with the living people and their sovereign nations standing on air, land, and sea, but most importantly, on their own soil. Now, I'm very distressed by what's happening in China. It's easily the largest genocide in human history that we know of, although there are some indications that there have been gigantic genocides using extraterrestrial weapons before this.
Wow.
So anyway, folks, don't agree to anything. Don't be represented by any of these politicians. Do not be dependent on them for your welfare and safety. Use your own heads and keep your own powder dry and keep working, because I certainly am. And everybody else here at the Federation is doing the same. Okay, so we're all here pulling for you. And I'm sorry I took up this entire time to kind of bring you all up to date and give you some history as background. But I think that this is all information that is going to serve you all in good stead as coordinators and as individual people. I think that it will give you some insight into things that have happened in the past and things that are happening now, and the way that these corporations and companies have insinuated themselves into the position of acting as, and there's two, acting as, in quotes, as governments, and you can trace it all the way back to the Hanseatic League, when the German merchants did take over the management of entire European governments. And so that was probably the first instance in modern history, or relatively modern history, where you had this kind of activity taking place. And then it got started again with the War of the Spanish Succession, and the Germans basically taking over as the monarchs of the British Isles. And for my money, folks, it's time that they got kicked out. I don't have anything against them individually. I don't know them. I pity anyone who gets stuck with the title of king. But it does not make sense. The whole situation does not make sense. It does not make sense for us to be under the boot heels of our public employee. It does not make sense for Americans to be blamed for the war profiteering and other bad behavior of organizations and people that are simply subcontractors of ours, who are supposed to be here providing us with good faith services. Okay, it does not make sense for the people of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales to be agreeing to the substandard denigration of being a British citizen, right? So anyway, my thoughts for the night and my updates on world events and things that are important to watch. Certainly watch what goes on in the Middle East. The scuttlebutt is that Trump has wised up and is realizing the political necessity of leaving Benjamin Netanyahu and the CIA and the Rockefeller Rothschild cabal behind. And it's even been rumored that he's going to recognize a Palestinian state in the region. Now, the exact particulars of that are not clear, and it is at this point not officially confirmed. but the wind is blowing in that direction, and I wouldn't doubt that it happens. That's the other thing to be watching. World opinion has shifted against Israel very decidedly as a result of the genocide in Gaza. And it doesn't matter how many people they arrest or how many institutions they try to curtail or harm for taking a stand against genocide. It's a genocide, and all thinking people everywhere are against it. And so the Netanyahu regime is beginning to pay the price that they are so richly owed. And we're hoping that it will result in some very big fundamental changes in the way that Britain and the US have operated in the Middle East, and also on their resource development priorities. There are a lot of different things that need to be corrected, things that have simply gotten started at some point in the past and have taken on a life of their own, and by sheer longevity have been accepted, even though they're illegal as hell. And, you know, the dead baby scam, both of them, or all three of them, if you want to be exact, is a good example. That's been going on since the 1100s. Think about it. 900 years of enslaving the living to pay the debts of the dead. 900 years of pretending that there was an older twin that died. Yeah. And it's only been, what, 112 years that the Brits have been pretending that there was a missing British merchant marine officer, a warrant officer known as a taxpayer, you know, who was supposed to collect taxes and tariffs for the British king. And it's only been since like 1925 that we've had a birth registration. Well, what was it, 1921, I believe, that the first run was made at a birth registration, vital statistics type registration operation on our land and soil. And then in 1925, amazingly, in 1925, the IRS came to our shores.
Bunch of pirates.
Yes, and we've been taxed by private banks, just like they did during the days of the Hanseatic League. We've been taxed by the Federal Reserve and the IMF both, and there's no excuse for any of it. So they all owe us a huge amount of credit, and they all owe us the return of our assets unharmed. And that's what we want and will accept.
Lord willing.
Yeah, I hope everybody now knows where I'm coming from as fiduciary. You know, I'm not here to start any wars or kill anybody over this, but I'm here to. I'm not doing that. I'm just basically holding line and not taking any wooden nickels. So, hope you all got a real education tonight and some insight into current events. And I'm sorry that I took up time that you had questions you wanted to ask. If you would just forward those questions to Michelle, and she can send them to me in an email, and I will make an honest effort this week to actually answer in writing, okay? And they can be dispersed out to everybody.
I'm happy to collect those and get them off to you, Anna. Thank you tonight. This is a really, it was a great night, actually. There was so much that you not only reviewed, but also taught us tonight. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
Take care, kids.
Yeah.
I'll be seeing you next week, Lord living me and keeping me. And as you can see, the rest of the dogs have joined.
Who let the dogs out? No.
Let the dogs in is the worst problem. Because now it's time to feed the dogs. Okay, guys. Good night, everyone. God bless.
Thank you so much, Anna. Good night.
Good night.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. We'll see you next week. And I'll be sending out the playback to all the coordinators on my list, and feel free to ask your coordinator for my email address to get those questions over to me if you've got them. All right, everybody, have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks,
God
Michelle.
bless. Good night.